everyone, and a big welcome back to the Forge Ahead Show, episode 8. I've got it right this time, I hope. Episode 8. So the Forge Ahead Show is a show where we bring you the people that have gone from adversity to excitement, the storytellers, the influencers in their own fields and experiences. And this week is absolutely no exception. A wonderful lady I'll bring to you in a second. So first and foremost, my name is Nick Elston. I'm an inspirational speaker on the lived experience of mental health. Yes, that's a job. It's been my job since 2016. I'm also the founder of Forging People, the lovely company that's bringing you this podcast. And we are brought to you by the guys at Dougie Stone Radio. They are freaking global, our sponsors, and our key ambassador there is Mark Brimpson, runs a whole host of different shows, so please do check him out. So today, I am bringing you, not only is she a speaker, is she an author, a podcast host, an amazing person, it's Catherine Morgan. Big round of applause, Catherine Morgan.
Thank you. That was a lovely introduction, Nick.
And well deserved. I mean, we first met at the Financial Wellbeing Conference, and if people don't know what financial wellbeing is, you certainly will after this. Back in last year, was it? Back in the real world when we could see people in person?
Was it last year or the year before?
The year before, actually, yeah.
I think it might have been, yeah.
This was at Bristol, wasn't it? My stomping ground, and at the Aerospace Museum, wasn't it?
Yeah, there was an amazing Concorde, wasn't it? Yeah, we held this meeting like underneath the Concorde. It was incredible.
It's really cool. So, first and foremost, tell us about you, where you're from, what you do.
Yeah, sure. So I live in a little village on the outskirts of Milton Keynes, and I'm a financial coach. So I've been in the industry since I was 18, since day dot, really.
Wow.
And I worked in the banking sector for about 16 years before I kind of had what I'd call my light bulb moment, when I felt very disconnected. Although I loved my job and I was really proud to work for the banks that I worked through over the years, I felt very disconnected because it was very product focused, and I loved the people side, and I didn't feel like I was able to really utilize my skills and the things that I was really passionate about in that kind of environment. So I had my kind of light bulb moment, which perhaps I'll share with you a little later. And
yes, please.
And now, so now I'm doing a lot of work in the financial wellbeing space. I run a lot of programs, memberships, courses for consumers, and particularly women. So my biggest mission and purpose is to help equip and prepare 1 million women to be financially resilient. And much of this is linked to my own personal story. And I do work with men as well, but that's just kind of how my market kind of opened itself up to me when I first started.
Do you know what? I absolutely get that. Is that a lot of my stuff is with more men, but it's not exclusive. But it's just because of the audience that we attract, I guess, in what we do. So big thanks for sharing that. And it's interesting to see your story is definitely one that is personal to you, because you get that. You really feel like you can see that when you talk about what you do. It's nice to see that passion from somebody in their space. So for those who are new to the concept of financial well-being, because it's always been there, it's like everything really, isn't it? But it's only really become a thing in maybe the past 18 months, 2 years, where it's coming in more into the play, especially come from a mental health perspective. It seems to be coming into that kind of field of vision. Tell everyone what financial well-being is and what that means to you.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And actually, I've been having this kind of internal debate with myself recently about what does financial well-being actually mean? Because I think I'd see two sides of it. There's a lot of companies that are more kind of product focused that will talk about financial well-being, and that's absolutely fine. And we do need products to help us, and particularly in the financial space. But for me, the word well-being is about you being well in your being. So you being well in your being is internally, not externally. So when we think about how we feel about ourselves, that's where we open up the world of well-being, mental well-being, physical well-being, how we feel about our own self-worth. And self-worth is incredibly linked to finances, because often what happens is we attach a meaning to every single possible experience that's ever happened to us. And if we think about the experience that we've all grown up with around money, it's very, very different. You know, the stories that you heard, the messages that your parents said or didn't say about money can sit in our subconscious belief system. So the 7-year-old version of ourselves is where we make most of our decisions. We know that most of our decisions come from the subconscious emotional part of our brain. So it's the emotion that drives a lot of the decisions that we make. So how we feel about money is very connected. And so for me, well-being is all interwoven into the financial side of it. Is how do we feel about money? What do we say to ourselves about money? What do we hear growing up about money? What meaning do we attach to having money or not having money? And we all have our kind of own little comfort zone of how comfortable we are to give and how comfortable we are to receive money. It's those two things, giving and receiving. And for me, growing up, I was very uncomfortable with having money. And so every time I had money, I would get rid of it as quickly as possible, because that was what I always did. And I always continued to do until I challenged that belief. So a lot of the beliefs we have around money are very interwoven to how we feel, how we think, how we behave. And often a lot of financial well-being is focused on things like budgeting, paying debt down, and that's really important. But for me, it's a bit like going into a primary school and teaching children on a specific topic. You can teach them everything they need to know about a particular topic, but if they don't have the right thoughts and feelings behind it, then they're not going to do it anyway. So it's actually about going internally for me first, seeking how we feel, how we think, that then drives how we then make decisions. And so that's what financial well-being is for me.
Brilliant. I mean, you mentioned kind of like how, can you now reflect on how you thought kind of like growing up on money with your experiences now, or actually was it something you were aware of at the time? That is it one of those things that you can only reflect on? For example, kind of with my experiences, that I can reflect now in a far different perspective than I would have felt at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think as a child you're really present to any of that, because you're a child. So when you're a 7-year-old, you would have already established your relationship with money by that age. And actually
Wow,
past the age of 7.
that's a big statement. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of research around this, and a lot of financial psychology dips into this space. But if you think about that, a 6-year-old's brain hasn't even fully developed, so they don't have the cognitive part of their brain hasn't developed enough to be able to question. So, for example, when you tell your 6-year-old, if any of you have got children, when you tell your 6-year-old to go and do something, they'll take it as black and white. They'll listen to what you have to say, and more often than not, they'll do what you ask them to do. But then as their brain develops, as they get to 7, 8, 9, 10, then the rational part of their brain starts to develop. And so that's when we start to make more conscious decisions for ourselves based on our environment. But up until that age, you're just conditioned by what's around you, your personal paradigm, the cultural paradigm that we live in, social media influences, all of those sorts of things. And so at the time, you're not really even aware of it. And even as an adult, unless you really bring some curiosity to your money beliefs, or your money story, or your money, what the psychologist Brad Klontz talks about, is about your money scripts. And actually, unless we bring some curiosity and consciousness to that, then we aren't actually even necessarily aware of what our money beliefs actually are.
I mean, that was really powerful. I was fortunate enough to be a guest on your podcast show fairly recently, and that was, for me, amazing to hear that I've always been a firm believer in the stuff I talk about in terms of conditioning and how we look at our biggest challenges in adult life, and we can definitely trace them back to our formative years. I never even once associated that with money as well. And you alluded to kind of like your story, your journey. Was that what kind of that process led you to working in the space anyway?
Yeah, so the biggest shift for me growing up was, so I had a pretty challenging childhood, as I'm sure many people have. And I don't necessarily think that it's to blame for my relationship with money, but I was really badly bullied at school, right the way through primary and secondary school, actually. I was really unfortunate. And what happened for me is that I lacked a lot of self-confidence as a young woman. And my dad immigrated to Australia when I was 15, and then my twin brother also followed him the following year. So I lost kind of two people very important people in my life at quite a pivotal age for a young woman. And at that time, what happened for me is I tried to control everything around me. So because there were things that I couldn't control, I tried to control things around me. So what did I do? I stopped eating. I was being bullied at school. I stopped eating, and I became almost like a bit of a recluse. I used to just come home from school, sit in my bedroom, and just starve myself. And for me, that continued for quite a long time. When I got into my 20s, so I started working at the bank when I was 18. And I had no idea what I wanted to do. I wanted to study law, actually. I wanted to be a police officer or a judge or something like that. But I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And so I took a year out. I was going to go and travel around Australia, which I did for a little while. And then I came back and I bought my first house. And then I met my now husband. And I thought actually, no, I'm going to take a year out. I'm just going to see what I want to do. And so I started working at the bank and learning about money, and that was really interesting for me. But I basically followed what my sister was doing because I copied everybody else. That was a big thing for me, is I felt that to feel more confident, if I did what everybody else was doing, then I would find my purpose, or I would feel better about myself. And of course, it made no difference at all, because it wasn't what made me light up, what made me feel passionate. So as I was going through my 20s, I had a really terrible relationship with money, because what I did is that every time I got paid, I would spend it on clothes. And I would spend it on clothes in the hope that, oh, if I just buy that pair of jeans, I'll feel skinnier, I'll feel better about myself. And of course it didn't happen. And I just got into this pattern, this behavioral pattern of being paid, spending it on clothes, leaving them in my wardrobe, not wearing them, being paid, spending more money. And I actually then got into a really bad debt cycle. I lived in my overdraft every single month. I racked up £30,000 worth of debt on credit cards and catalogs and store cards, and working at the bank. So you can imagine the judgment and the shame that I felt of sitting in the bank every single day and telling people what they should be doing with their money and then not doing it myself. But I just buried my head in the sand. I didn't really understand how to deal with it. And then as I came into my late 20s, I was always really ambitious at work, always exploring the next opportunity. Every 2 years, I'd get this 2-year itch. And just before the financial crisis of 2008, I was going to go and work out in Dubai. I thought I just want to go somewhere hot and nice and warm. And I explored Dubai, and I thought, no, as a woman, I felt quite uncomfortable working in the whole very unregulated financial space in Dubai. And a job came up in Jersey in the Channel Islands. And so we flew over there one weekend. It chucked it down with rain the entire weekend. And me and my fiance at the time came back and said, this looks like quite a nice place to live. Let's go and live in Jersey. So we rented our house out. We moved out to Jersey. And I then managed a team of financial advisors over on the Channel Islands for 5 years. And we got married over there, and I had my first son over there. But just before I fell pregnant with my first son, I walked into the coffee shop one morning on my way to work. And on the counter in front of me was a leaflet. And on that leaflet, it said, have a personal styling session with an image consultant. Understand what you should wear for your body shape, what colors you should wear to make you look youthful. And I came home that evening and said to my husband, oh, I would love to have that done. And so he bought it for me for my birthday. And I had a full day with this lady. And at the end of that day, I remember vividly sitting on my red couch in Jersey in this little cottage. And it was in the winter, so it was pitch black outside. She left my house, and I sat down on this couch and I cried my eyes out. And it was like suddenly someone had given me permission to get rid of all of the clothes that I'd been buying and hoarding for years. I had like 8 bin bags of clothes around me. And it was like a light bulb moment had gone off for me. I was like, suddenly I felt now is a chance for me to really tackle my relationship with my body. So what happened for me after that is that I then actually understood how I was using money as a tool to fill a void in my life that I didn't have, which essentially was, for me, loving myself. I had to give that love to myself. I spent so long seeking it externally, external validation of, how good I could be, or how many more exams could I do to make me feel better about myself. And none of that worked. And so I flew the lady over who trained the lady who did my personal styling session. I flew her over from the UK and I said, can you train me to be an image consultant? And she spent 2 weeks with me. I then set up my first business as an image consultant. And I then fell pregnant with my son. So when I was on maternity leave, I built this business in my house. I had like a little room in the house, and I would have mums come and have their styling sessions done. And that was my first business. And I learned a lot. I mean, I could do a whole podcast episode on what I learned about business in that business. But I absolutely loved it. And then when my maternity leave finished, I had to go back to work at the bank. And I went back to work part-time. I went back to work as a financial advisor. I couldn't be a part-time sales manager. And then we moved back to the UK. And if I may continue with the second part of this story, if that's okay.
Yeah, please do. I'm captivated. I'm sure everybody else is as well. It's amazing.
So the second part of this story is that when we moved back to the UK, I then had a second business. So when I launched the personal styling business, I was then selling jewelry and scarves and things to accessorize and style ladies. And I thought, why am I selling other people's products? Why don't I sell my own? So I then built a gift business, and I built it online. I had an online gift business. I went to all the trade fairs and I learned how to buy stock and learned all about the wholesaling kind of side of the business. And actually that was my dad's world. So my dad helped me a lot building that business. And then I fell pregnant with my second son. And that was in 2013. And in 2013, when Thomas was born, he was very, very poorly when he was born. So we actually almost lost him as a baby. When he was 3 days old, we took him into hospital and he wasn't feeding well, and he was quite jaundiced, and he was sleeping for excessive periods of time. We were kind of like, yes, we've got a sleeper. And then we'd actually discovered it was because he wasn't very well. So we were actually told when he was 3 days old that there was a 50-50 chance he was even going to survive. So he had a really tough start to his life, but he was like such a chilled out, happy baby. And when he was 5 weeks old, on the 1st of October, 2013, we woke up one morning and he had a really disturbed night's sleep. He was grunting in his sleep, which was really odd. Didn't want to feed, didn't want to sleep, just didn't want to do anything. And on the 1st of October, I remember waking up, and my friend was due over that day to have these baby hand casting sessions done, where you put the baby's hand into clay and it creates this beautiful memory. And my friend came over that morning. I got my little one off to nursery, and Thomas, I just thought maybe he's just really tired or he's having a growth spurt, so I just kind of let him do his thing. And my friend came over that morning, and it was Thomas's turn for me to pick him up out of his Moses basket to do his casting. And I remember walking over to the bay window in our house, and he was asleep. So never wake a sleeping baby. But I picked him up out of his Moses basket, and he screamed at me. And I thought, oh, maybe it's just because I've woken him up. So I quickly undid his baby grow. And as I took his baby grower off his hands were like ice. And I remember turning to my friend and saying, that's odd. He's obviously just had them covered, and the heating was on. So I was thinking, that's really strange. But he was just not happy at all. And it was one of those screams that it was like a kind of pain cry. And I remember quickly doing his hand casting and turning around to my friend and saying, do you mind leaving? Because I just want to get him down to the doctors. Something's not quite right. And so she left. I rang the doctors. I booked an appointment for about 3 hours later. And I put him back in the Moses basket. And I rang my friend who's a nurse, and I said, look, these are all the symptoms he's got. He's got really cold hands. He's not feeding. He's making these grunting noises. And he was kind of pushing into his stomach. And my friend said, have you checked his temperature? And I thought, well, no, I haven't, because he was cold. I was kind of wrapping him up in blankets. And I checked his temperature, and his temperature's like 39 degrees. And for anyone who hasn't got children, anything over about 37 is normally when you're reaching for the cow pole or something needs to happen.
Oh, wow.
And so I put him back in the Moses basket, and he was just laying there, really, really still, a little bit grey, and just all he was moving was his eyes, and he was just blinking, like every blink was really painful. And I literally put him straight into the car seat. I rang my husband and I said, I'm going straight down to A&E. I'm not taking any chances. And within 20 minutes of getting him to, he was very, very quiet, not responding at all, actually. And I'll never forget the moment when the doctors put me on a wheelchair. I had Thomas in my arms and they wheeled me into resuscitation. And I remember thinking, like, God, this is really serious. Even now, like, there's moments when I get really emotional, just like thinking, goodness, like, you know, what could have happened? And we were really lucky. We got him in hospital really quickly. And literally we were swarmed by like 16 doctors, and, you know, he was given antibiotics very, very quickly. But I remember the doctor kept saying this one word to me. He kept saying sepsis. And I remember thinking, I think I know what sepsis is, but I'm not 100% sure. Obviously later frantically Googling what the hell is sepsis, and then not actually realizing that sepsis is the biggest killer of newborn babies. And I did not know that septicemia, which was sepsis, that cold hands, cold feet, grunting in their sleep were all high symptoms of septicemia. And I didn't know that. And I felt really, really stupid. And just to fast track you forward from that, when I went back to work a year later, I suffered significantly with anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder after that event, because when it was all going on for me, I never felt that anything bad was going to happen. I thought, well, what do we need to do? Let's go into solution mode. I'm a financial advisor, for goodness sake. Let's go into solution mode. What can I do to make him be better? And luckily he was in hospital for a couple of weeks. He was actually then diagnosed after a lumbar puncture with bacterial meningitis, which is the worst form of meningitis that you can have. But because we got him in really quickly, he was pumped with antibiotics for 2 weeks and he was absolutely fine. And he's still now to this day a beautiful, almost 7-year-old boy.
Amazing.
But when I got back home, when I lost all that medical support, I felt really vulnerable. Everyone kept saying to me, oh, you know, if you hadn't have got him in, what could have happened? Which I know they were saying to help me, but it actually made me feel really like, oh my God, what would have happened if I didn't have got him in, you know, hadn't have got him in. And so I went into PTSD, and every time he cried, it took me back to a moment in hospital when the doctors are jabbing him with cannulas and needles, because I couldn't control it. I couldn't help him. And so I then experienced really significant anxiety up until the point where I was standing in the kitchen about 9 months later with a knife in my hand thinking, I can't do this anymore. I need to get some help. And I did. I went and saw a psychologist, and I had a couple of years worth of therapy. But when I went back to work at the bank, I remember sitting there and thinking, how many people feel judged or shameful when they don't understand jargon that I experienced in the medical side in financial services? How many people don't understand what pensions are, or how to manage money, or how to get out of debt cycles? How many people feel shame? And because who teaches us this, right? No one teaches us this stuff. And that's the second light bulb moment I had in my life. And I was like, right, I need to build a business that helps people to understand the jargon, to understand that wealth creation is not just for the wealthy. And actually, before we even learn the practical steps, we've got to learn the emotional connection that we have with money. Because for me, going through all of that myself, I understood what I used money for in my life and what feeling I was trying to create by living in debt. I just wanted security and safety. So for me, every time I got out of my overdraft, I found any excuse, anything I could spend my money on, because that was what was familiar to me. So that was what led me into the whole discovery, I guess, of financial well-being and financial coaching.
Wow. Whew. Proper goosebumps then. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, with such clarity. I know that wasn't easy for you. I know that wasn't easy for you to share. So thank you for doing that. Where do I go from there? So what I do love, and it's something that the kind of that adversity to excitement model, and I think that really, and it is through, I mean, as you know, that forging people came from a line in my talk that we either let our adversities and our challenges define us negatively for the rest of our days, or we choose for it to forge something powerful, something beautiful, something that didn't exist without you going through that stuff in the first place. And for me, to go from the adversity of being bullied at school to having your self-belief and self-esteem and self-confidence taken away, to having some amazing shiny letters behind you now on your wall, showcasing your personal brand. For me, I love that. And for me to see that you're actually a real force for good. And if you don't get told this enough, you should be immensely proud of what you do. And especially, you've got a very high profile. You are very well respected. A lot of people that I speak to think very highly of you. So yeah, there we go. I'm trying to make your head too big, of course.
Let's make it feel lovely on a Friday morning.
Well, it's true. The kind of the financial wellbeing conference, actually it was 2018. I kind of had a quick scan back. So you're quite right. It was a couple of years ago. That happened the same month as I first spoke at an event called Accountex at London Excel, when it wasn't a hospital, of course. Now, those two events really gave me an insight into the financial world. And if I look at the top industries that I work in as a mental health coach, as a speaker, that kind of stuff, it's financial services, it's wealth management, it's accountancy. Actually, so even though it's not people that are necessarily on the receiving end of financial wellbeing advice, they're the people themselves that money and mental health challenges got a real hand-in-hand relationship where, like you said, not just in terms of to find our accountability and value, we will use spending, the pursuit of material objects to chase that kind of self-worth, which then shifts. But also the fact that things like, if I get a letter from the HMRC and I'm an anxious person, not knowing the abbreviations of jargon and all that kind of implications, massive anxiety spikes. I'm actually an agony uncle for accounting website. Go figure. Who would have thought? I'm actually starting an online radio show for them in a couple of weeks' time, like an agony uncle column. It's going to be like kind of like the old BBC radio ones, like play some stab music in the background, doing up the story. Yeah, it's really cool. Anyway, so but a lot of kind of people in the financial space write in, not just accountants, but people in that space write in, actually saying that the problem they've got is managing expectations. It's because they have the insight and the knowledge, like you have the insight and the knowledge. But a lot of people are coming to you asking for advice on something that you may have just heard about. So if we're currently recording this in the kind of semi-lockdown pandemic of 2020, so Bojo will go and announce the next tax break, the next incentive, that kind of stuff, that they will hit the phone straight away, and they expect people, financial experts, to know immediately how to access that when they've just heard at the same time. So do you think managing expectations is a big problem at the moment for people in the financial space?
It's a really good question. That the word expectation is interesting for me, because in anything in life, when we have expectations of something, then that can be challenging, because then when those expectations don't happen, we can feel disappointed, or we can feel let down, or we can feel, place a lot of judgment on ourselves. So the way I always view life in anything is don't go into anything with any expectations, because then you can live more in your present reality of, well, if it doesn't go how I think it's going to go, what have I learned about that? What have I learned from myself? And, particularly in financial services and, even with things like government announcements, things can change so much. So if we have these expectations and they're high expectations, then that can really affect your well-being, can't it? Because if, let's say, for example, let's say you were dealing with high anxiety and you were given some medication from your doctor, for example, and the expectation that you had on that is that these tablets are going to fix everything, because that's what you believe, because you go to a GP for a solution. then if you have that expectation and that doesn't happen, then you feel even worse because you feel like that solution hasn't worked. So for me, sometimes relieving ourselves or reducing the level of expectation that we have on everything is something that is really powerful, because it brings us back into the present moment. And sometimes with anxiety is about the future, something that might happen. And so what happens is that we bring ourselves out of future into our present reality and just think about what's going on for us in that moment on that particular day, then that can really help to just reduce that anxiety of what might actually happen in the future.
I think that's very, very powerful stuff. And as you know from when I've spoken, it's that taking away assumption is a really powerful move. I mean, even like right now, the world's greatest minds don't know when this is going to end, what even the end looks like. So who are we to take a stab at that? And actually so I've decided to kind of just watch the news, the official government update every night. And I mean, that's a whole different conversation whether you believe that's true or not, but that's all we've really got right now. And actually everything else is speculation. And I think that the danger is in the assumption, in like you said, and it fits so nicely into kind of, and this is kind of where I feel we got real kind of, I don't really like the word, but synergy kind of thing, where we kind of want to achieve the same thing for people, but from very different angles. And anxiety to me was regret from the past or fear of the future. Very rarely was it today. And actually the best way to do that is to stop that assumption or the expectation, because anxiety is created in trying to control the uncontrollable. So if we can let go of that stuff, what we're left with is the stuff that is controllable. But from that kind of expectation perspective is also having the compassion and understanding to realize that finances can be an anxiety trigger for people. Tax can be an anxiety trigger for people. Health, you mentioned like going to a GP and stuff, but they're all because you go into people that have the knowledge that you don't. So you are basically banking everything you've got, your feeling around that, on that person being the fixer. And that can create huge problems either way, both as a person going to the accountant or to the accountant trying to manage that kind of expectation. So yeah, it's difficult. How do you look after yourself? What's your do you have a self-care process?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say this is one of the things I have to work on the most because I have a very giving relationship with everything, actually, with my business, with my clients. And so the thought of looking after, and I'm a mum of two as well. So, you know, and as a woman, typically we are very giving in our relationship anyway, because that's, you know, genetically we are there to look after others. So when it comes to looking after myself, I've invested, actually, someone asked me the other day, actually, what was the best investment you've made in your business? And the best investment I think I've made is actually learning how to look after my own needs and myself without feeling guilty. So there's a couple of things that I do. So financially, I have a treat pot. So I bank with Starling Bank, and in Starling Bank, you can set up these little pots of money. And so I have a little treat pot. And every month, a certain amount of money goes into that pot, and I just use it to treat myself. It could be a nice candle,
cool. I like that.
You know, a stationery. You know, I'm a big stationery addict, so I love my notepads and things like that.
Something else. Ex-stationer. Used to be a stationer for 15 years. Just saying.
Fantastic.
People love stationery.
We do. I mean, I remember the first day of school, Nick, and my school uniform was purple, like a purple jumper, purple tie. And oh my goodness, like, no wonder I was bullied. Like, I went to school with a purple bag, with a purple pencil case, a matching purple ruler, pen, lunchbox, everything in my bag was purple. But so that's where my kind of obsession, I think, started with stationery.
You cannot beat the feeling or the look of a new exercise book. And then you get one page in, you want to start all over again because it's not perfect. You get that.
Well, it's that, yeah, the perfectionist mindset, isn't it? But
it is. That's the thing.
But I have a treat pot for myself. So and so from a mental accounting perspective, Parkinson's law is the psychology behind actually, by mentally accounting that pot of money is for myself, then I can actually detach the emotion of guilt away from that particular pot. So that's one thing I do. I love reading. So I'm a big podcast, a listener. I love reading books. And so I always try and carve out time in my week to have some time out for myself where I can go and read a book somewhere. I've just bought myself a bike during lockdown as
Nice.
well. So and it's like a Mary Poppins bike. I've got a little basket on the front. I
Very
can
cool.
put my water bottle in there. I can go for a nice, cycle for an hour. We've got some lovely cycle paths around the village. And then, so I also have just started practicing gratitudes and journaling. So one of the things, I don't do it every day. I try to do it as much as I can. But I journal in the morning when I first wake up, and in between that stage when you're not actually fully awake, when you're just starting to wake, that's actually when a lot of your subconscious beliefs are activated. So it's a really good time to journal. So I have a journal planner, and I pick out some questions from there, and I just brain dump anything that comes out of my mind at that time of the morning.
Love that.
And in the evening, then I do a gratitude exercise. Sometimes I do it in the morning. But often in the evening, I'll just reflect on my day and think about what have I been grateful for. And sometimes I've been using the Calm app recently. So I've been putting on a meditation track as I go to sleep.
Yeah, that's cool.
And just kind of trying to look after my mind. But for me, I've invested a lot of money this year as well in things like numerology. I've been looking at some kind of spiritual guidance, which sounds a bit woo-woo, but it's just a new
I'm all
area
in with the
that
woo-woo.
I've been
big and fluffy as they come. It's all good.
exploring. And then I've been having some rapid transformational therapy with a friend of mine. So rapid transformational therapy is about just going into a very deep state of relaxation. And then they're going into your subconscious beliefs and picking some of those self-sabotaging ones out, and then kind of working with those. And that's been amazing for me because, again, focusing on your self-worth ultimately increases your net worth, because the more confident you are, the more comfortable you may feel about charging your business and those kind of things. So those are kind of some of the ways that I try and look after myself.
Love that. And actually is quite right. I mean, the first time I was asked, like, how much do you charge to come and speak? Just never crossed my mind. And actually then it was a really weird kind of balance between what I felt comfortable and that self-worth element, and actually my relationship with money. So to me, I know 500 quid was a lot of money growing up, but to a lot of people that wouldn't be good enough by going in. So it's a really interesting balance, that kind of perception. Anyway, pretty chat about that for hours. Love that. And actually journaling and gratitude is something that I've done a lot of before, especially in my recovery period. That was a really powerful angle. I've actually found in lockdown I've put a bigger focus on self-care. I think it's a lot easier to form a daily routine without the travel that I was doing before.
Yeah, sure.
So I've been trying, there's an app called Balance, which is basically an AI-driven meditation tool. So you tell it your challenges, and then it will train you every day, and based on your responses from the day before, it will take it in a very different direction.
Oh, that's interesting. I have to write that one down.
Yeah, it's really, really cool for meditation. And the second element I've been trying and incorporating into my daily self-care process is going back to brain training. It used to be on like the Game Boy or something, like the Japanese kind of brain training thing. But no, by the same company, there's an app called Elevate, which is a brain training. Again, it's AI-driven brain training. So the first time it gave me questions on maths and literacy and reading and lots of different things. Like it's kind of the first time I've done anything since school. Based on my results from the first day, it changes it all up for the second day. And so it evolves with you over time. So it finds your level and then trains you up. And I think that there's a real great space for that actually in the well-being stuff as well. But also the financial well-being stuff. And you'd be amazing at kind of putting something together on that. Just throwing it out there, just saying. Because you do bring, this is the thing, it's that it can be quite a dry area to look at as an overview to people that are not in the space. And you do bring a really human edge to something which can be, again, quite dry, quite that kind of stereotypically grey environment.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the way I am helping to support financial well-being at the moment is, so there's a gentleman called Chris Budd who runs the Financial Wellbeing podcast, which I know you've been a guest on.
I know Chris.
And he's amazing. And Chris set up last year a new initiative in the UK called the Initiative of Financial Wellbeing. And I am responsible for running the financial coaching stream, or the arm of one of the streams that we have within that initiative. So that's kind of my way of giving back and helping to grow the concept of financial well-being. But also the other thing that I've done this year is I've launched a brand new training program into the financial services profession called the Financial Coaching Program. And this is where I'm wanting to help other financial professionals to implement the tools, the resources, the exercises, the learning that I've been doing over the years, so that they can learn themselves how to improve their relationship with money, but then help their clients to have the same outcomes. Because for me, the more we can help the profession to move ahead, to move along from just being product focused to more people focused, then the greater opportunity there is for me to fulfill my mission of equipping 1 million women to be financially resilient. I can't do that just by myself. So the more I can grow that space and help the financial services profession, along with many other people who are also, trying to create some significant change. We do need change to happen in the industry. We do need to improve consumers' confidence with reaching out for financial advice. We need to make it more accessible, and we need to be talking about well-being at the core of everything. Not the core and the starting point should not be financial products, in my view. It should be
Absolutely.
Somebody's well-being.
And it's people like yourself and Chris. Chris is an amazing guy. He's also a Bristol Rovers fan, which is good from my point of view. And that's how we first met, weirdly. It's through the good work that you're doing, and like I said, through the IFW, that we're speaking on the same virtual stage in a couple of weeks' time. Which will be amazing. So again, it's an organisation that I'm definitely throwing my full and ample weight behind in terms of going forward. So in the spirit, we're both visibly and openly honest people. I think that's fair to say. We were kind of chatting just before about we're recording this on a Friday morning. We both felt a little jaded going into this, although we seem to be a lot brighter now, which is good. This has changed everything. But you mentioned about moon phases. Tell us about moon phases, because that was really fascinating for me.
Goodness, I've been working with a numerology specialist, and this is really interesting for me, because I'm very intuitive, really highly intuitive. It's one of my kind of superpowers, but I've never really known what else to do with that intuition. And recently, I've been quite connected to, I don't even know how I would describe it, whether it's source or I don't know what it is. I just, something's there for me, and I feel very intuitive, and I kind of think, right, what else can I do with this intuition? And I had an experience actually last year when I was on a retreat, when I sat and listened and observed this lady sharing her story, and all of a sudden I had this wave of, you just need to stop talking. Like, it was almost like something was telling me, you just need to stop talking for a minute. And then all of a sudden I was like, I know what happened to you. Like, something happened on a beach in a tent, and I went on to just basically describe what had happened to her. And it was like this, everyone in the room, including myself, was like, whoa, what just happened there? Like, that was weird. And like, it wasn't like someone was, I wasn't hearing voices or anything like that. So you don't have to worry about that. But it was just weird. And it was so moving. And so I started working with I don't think I've ever told anyone that before, by the way, but I was working.
So cool. It's like exclusive. Yeah. I'm with you. This is great.
I was working with a numerology coach recently, and numerology is about kind of connecting in numbers with the universe. And again, for me, this is just a whole nother area of it I'm exploring. And like the Queen uses it. The Queen chose her coronation date based on numerology. So it's very embedded in science. And I had my numerology life path number assessed, and I interviewed the lady who I'm working with, Jo Solly, on my podcast In Her Financial Shoes last month. So if you're interested in this, go and check that out. But
I am definitely checking it out.
Oh, it's so, honestly,
it sounds fascinating. Yeah,
it's so addictive as well. But based on your date of birth, so when you came into the world, you work out your numerology number, your life path number. And I'm a 22. So 22 is the architect of change. And so other people who are 22s, like Oprah Winfrey, Brené Brown, I think Donald Trump is a 22. So these are people who create big, big change. And that made a lot of sense to me, because now I'm working in this space of trying to create big change. I feel like it's not my business. I just feel like this is my life. This is my purpose. And I've done a lot of other work with numerology as well, about understanding what your life path, your energy number, your what year you're in as well. So at the moment, I'm in a year of building connections and relationships. So building my tribe, building my communities, sort of supporting my groups, my memberships, my programs. Next year, I'm going to go into a year of kind of reflection. And so next year will be a great year for me to write my book, for example, my next book. But what that taught me was that we do have to work with our kind of superpowers, with who we are and what we're put on this planet to do. And it'd be interesting to see what your number is, Nick, actually.
I'm going to be straight on that.
But this year, 2020, is the 2. So you've got 2 in the year 2020. So that's the year of 22. 22 is about the architect of change. So right from the 1st of January, we saw this in the world. 2020 was always going to be a significant year of change.
What a change.
And will continue to be. And again, so if you look at the numerology and science, 2020 was always going to be a massive year of change. Now, that's quite empowering to think that, well, if this year was always going to be a big change, this is why we've seen, huge ripple effects in the economy. So it is really interesting. And I can't even remember what the original question was that you asked me at the start, but
moon phases and
moon
energy.
Phases, that's it. So the lady that I'm working with is
it's an amazing detour, though. I love that detour. It's great.
So Joe Solly, who I'm working with, was then talking about moon phases. So apparently we've just come out of a full moon and we're going into a new moon. And this is when a full moon is, and a new moon is about different phases of when you need to cleanse and get rid of anything in your life that isn't serving you, or things that you've been holding on to that you keep saying yes to, or just cleansing and getting rid of everything. But also a new moon can also create a lot of change. So if in a couple of weeks' time, if you look up I don't know exactly what date it is, when the new moon happens, and you feel a bit jaded or a little bit off, then sometimes it can actually just be to do with the patterns of the moon and energy. And I'm still learning about this, so I'm not. I don't feel like I'm an expert to share that, but
you've definitely ignited that in me now. So you've passed on the interest, if nothing else. It's great. It's fantastic. So as I ask every guest on the show, I am the MC of the O2 Arena. I'm just about to introduce you to the stage. 20,000 people have paid good money, good hard-earned money to see you deliver your talk. What's your walk-on music?
Oh, I'm a big music fan. So this is a difficult one, but I think if I had to choose a track, it would have to be Jessie J. It's Not About the Money, because
nice.
It is never about the money. It's never about the money. If I had to choose like a song that was, it depends on what I'm talking about, but if I was talking about money, shame and our stories, it would have to be that song. It's Not About the Money, because the lyrics in that song are so true. It isn't about the money, the bling, the bling, the bling. It's not about that. It's
you'll burst into song if you want, because I haven't got the license to play the music, so just sing it, be fine. Amazing. Thank you very much. And thanks so much for being an amazing guest on the show. You're just a wonderful person to have on. So thank you very much. Big round of applause, Catherine.
Thanks
for having wisdom. Any parting wisdom?
Oh, parting wisdom on a Friday morning.
Yeah.
Do you know, like progress over perfection is something that I would say, if you're listening to this and thinking, I need to find my purpose, or you're feeling anxious, or you're feeling just that something needs to change in your life, I always just think about, is that what one thing can you do to start working towards what you desire? So write a list out of things that you desire. So sit down one day with a piece of paper and just put, I desire ... and just fill in that blank. I desire to live closer to the sea. I desire to have a cherry blossom tree in my garden. I desire to go on an extra holiday every year. Really think about some things that you really desire in your life. And then think about what's one step you can make towards that goal, that intention, and get really intentional. Because I think a lot of the time we always we want to create change sometimes, or a new habit or a new belief or a new behavior, but the difficulty is actually getting started. And so I always think, ditch the perfectionism, ditch the comparing yourself to everybody else, be who you want to be, and get grounded in what makes you happy, what is going to support your well-being, what feeling are you trying to create. If you want to feel safety and security, how can you create that feeling in your life? What can you do today to create that feeling for yourself? And progress towards that, rather than focusing on, perfection. Progress over perfection.
What a way to finish. Amazing words of wisdom there. Thank you very much. And for a definite 22 guaranteed. I'm definitely going to be checking out numerology as well. So big thank you to Catherine for coming on today. Thank you for being an amazing guest. I look forward to catching you next week. Got some more amazing guests lined up for the Forge Ahead show. So stay tuned and I'll see you soon. Take care, guys. Cheers. Bye.